Hi everyone, today in this lesson we're going to talk about independent and dependent clauses and subordinating conjunctions. Do you guys understand what those are? Yes? Do you? Okay, so an independent clause right here needs a subject and a verb. And they will need to have a complete and solid thought. They stand alone all by themselves. For an example, the lawn needs fertilizer. Here's your subject and your verb, and this one has a direct object, but it doesn't have to have a direct object. Does that make sense? But it has to have a subject and a verb for it to make sense. So this sentence right here, Paul, can completely stand alone all by itself. Now, dependent clauses, now how I can remember independent, like I'm an independent person, I'm an adult, I can do things and I can live on my own, but a dependent person needs somebody else to take care of them. And that's what you guys are. You are my dependent, Dad's dependent. Does that make sense? So that's what helps me understand the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause. So dependent clauses, they have to have a subject and a verb also, and it does not have a complete thought. It cannot be in a sentence all by itself. So just like you cannot be out on your own because you are not an adult, you are our dependent, you have to be with us. Does that make sense? You have to live with us. Same with the dependent clause. It has to be with an independent clause to make sense. Okay? So a dependent clause has to sit with an independent clause to be able to be allowed to be in a sentence. All right, so here's an example of a dependent clause. Which Paul mowed? So if it starts with a subordinate word, then you're going to end up with a dependent clause. Doesn't that sound a little bit silly? Which Paul mowed? It tells you something more. Which Paul mowed what? What are you talking about? You can say Paul mowed, and that completely stands all by itself, and it is allowed to say Paul mowed, but you can't say which Paul mowed and let it stand by itself. It would have to sit in another sentence. And so look at these. These right here are subordinating conjunctions. Sub means smaller or below, and so ordinating or ordinate means or. So you remember, sub means what?
Smaller or below.
Yeah, it means it's smaller or below, and this means in order. So these are going to cause a dependent clause that's going to be smaller and below the independent clause. So you could say, although Paul mowed, as Paul mowed, because Paul mowed, before Paul mowed, if Paul mowed, since Paul mowed, and so and so and so on. It tells you something more is coming, and you can't stand by itself. If you use these words, then you know you're going to have an independent clause with that dependent clause. Now here are some, these are not all, but these are a lot of the words that we use in our writing and a lot in our speech. Although, as, because, before, if, since, that, until, when, where, whether, while. Subordinating conjunctions. Now there's more out there. I just put the ones that are most. Yes, sweetie. I just wrote these in alphabetical order. Yeah, do you see that? But why don't you say them? Let's say them over and over again. Can since only be a subordinating conjunction? No. So some of these words can also be prepositions. So if you're going to use it as a preposition, then what we need to make sure a noun is the object of the preposition. And so that confuses people. So like before is a preposition. So just make sure that you have the noun. Now if you're going to use the word with a subject and a verb, so if you're going to use since and then a subject and a verb after it, then you know you're starting a dependent clause. But if you're using it with a noun that follows it, now you can have adjectives in between that, but if you're going to have a noun, then you're going to have a prepositional phrase. So, just so you're understanding, these can sit in different parts of speech in our sentences. They don't, but if you're going to start it out with a clause, it's going to be a dependent clause. And these are called subordinating conjunctions. You're putting them in order, but that's lower or below. Now remember, a coordinating conjunction, you're with, and those are the fanboys that we talked about in another lesson. Okay, now look at this sentence. The lawn which Paul mowed needs fertilizer. See how we put commas in between this? Because remember, if we started off with the word which, and it's considered a non-essential, and it needs to be comma. If we put the lawn that Paul mowed needs fertilizer, then it's not considered a non-essential, it's an essential word, and we don't comma that. Now, we already went into a lesson that really talked a lot about that, so I'm not going to go and talk very much about that. But this is considered a dependent clause right here, and it cannot stand alone. So see how we have the subject and verb for this one? This is a clause, and we have a subject and the verb for this one. So see how it can sit right inside? This is your independent clause. This is the dependent clause. See how they can sit right in the middle of them? So you need to decide if they're going to take commas or if they're not going to take commas. Now here's some comma rules about that, boy. Because the lawn is turning yellow, comma, it needs fertilizer. Well, here's your subordinating conjunction. Now this is the comma rule. If you start your entire sentence with your clause, your dependent clause that starts with your subordinating conjunction, you have to put a comma at the end of the clause. Not at the end of, see, this is your subject and your verbs. You don't put it at the end of your verbs, Paul. You put it at the end of the clause. Is where the comma goes. And see here, then it starts. It needs fertilizer. So it is a pronoun. What's the antecedent of it? The lawn.
The lawn, sorry.
So you have to refer. Now when you do a sentence like this, here we just said lawn, the lawn needs fertilizer. We use lawn in that. But here you can replace it with a pronoun because you have your antecedent sitting in the sentence. So you know what it's talking about. But this right here, it needs fertilizer, is your independent clause, and it stands alone. So this is what you do if you're using a subordinating conjunction at the beginning with a dependent clause. What's our subordinating word in this sentence? The lawn needs fertilizer since it has not been applied all winter. What is your subordinating conjunction in this sentence? Since, very good. So, but look at this. This right here, the lawn needs fertilizer, is your independent clause. This is your dependent clause. Since it has not been applied all winter, can that sit by itself when you put on the word since? It knows that since what? Since it had been applied all winter. What are they talking? Exactly. There is more to it. So do you see this? Since. But look at this. This is at the end. You don't take a comma. You do it when it's at the beginning. Do you see that? While I was cleaning the house, comma, Paul mowed the lawn. Here it is again. Here's your subject and your verb for your dependent clause right here. Subject and verb for your independent clause. See how Paul mowed the lawn sounds just fine all by itself. While I was cleaning the house, well, while I was cleaning the house, what? It needs the independent clause. It has, so basically, you guys, this dependent clause has to live with the independent clause. Okay, this dependent clause is not old enough to live on its own. It has to live with the independent person, the independent sentence. Yeah.
So, I was cleaning the house while Paul was mowing the lawn.
Yes, would it need a comma?
Yes.
No.
No.
If you did it that way, I was cleaning the house while, Paul, you would not need it because now this just became your independent clause, but once you put the while right here, it has now become dependent. Does that make sense? No comma. The only reason the comma is here is because it's starting it. So your dependent clause is at the beginning with a subordinating conjunction takes the comma. Okay, Paul, mow the lawn before you apply the fertilizer. All right, so Paul, why is that comma right here?
Because it's a noun with a direct.
Awesome, it's a noun with a direct address. Well, where is your independent clause, Daniel?
Mow the lawn.
Paul, mow the lawn. Is your independent clause? Is your independent clause starting the sentence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no comma.
It means that's a no comma. Because look, before you apply, you have your subject and your verb. See, before, this can be a preposition. But this is not a preposition because you have a subject and a verb following it. Does that make sense? So if we have our independent clause and then our dependent clause, are we going to take a comma?
No.
No, we do not take commas. If we have our dependent clause and then our independent clause, does it take a comma?
Yes. Yeah.
So I would maybe put this in your notes that you guys can remember. So you're not writing it all that. You can just say, oh, what comma rule is that? Where do I put the comma? Do I put it after my independent clause? No. Do I put it after my dependent clause? Yes, when you're using a subordinating conjunction. That's where you're using a subordinating conjunction. And oftentimes when you're using these, they become adverbs describing the verb, oftentimes. When writing with a subordinating conjunction, comma, you are causing the clause to become dependent because it indicates more to come. So that's what's happening right there. So see how we started this? We started this with a subordinating word, when. So here is the end, writing with a subordinating conjunction, comma. So this is where this, Paul, do you see this? This is where this ends. This whole clause ends right here. Now you're starting your next one. You are this, look here, subject and a verb. Does that make sense? But do you have another clause in here?
Yeah.
What? What is it?
Because it.
Yes, but did we put a comma here?
No.
No, it's because it fits right here. So you look, we had 3 of them in here. With this one, we put the comma because we have our subject and verb. With this one, we did not put the comma because it fits this. Okay, does that make sense? It indicates, right here, subject and verb. Okay, if we just take, it indicates more to come, this is an independent, it is an independent clause. But once we put the word because in front of it, because it indicates more to come, it becomes dependent. Are you understanding that, Paul? Okay, so it indicates more to come. It's independent because it doesn't have a subordinating conjunction. But once we put that subordinating conjunction, it has now become dependent because it indicates more to come. Do you see the difference? So just understand how you would use your commas in that. My nephew married the love of his life so that they can build their lives together. Why is there not a comma here? And I put this together right after my nephew got married, so that's why the sentence is in here. Where is your independent clause in that one?
My nephew married the love of his life.
Okay, my nephew married the love of his life. What's your dependent clause?
So that they can build their lives together.
Right, so we have our dependent, our subordinating conjunction right there. That's that, and sometimes so can also be a subordinating conjunction. It could be a coordinating conjunction or a subordinating conjunction, depending on how you're using it in the word. So look at this, that right here. We do not have a comma. It's because it's this. Independent clause with, and then we have dependent clause with an independent clause. All right? So we have this right here is this. Independent clause. It does not take a comma right here because it's this. But dependent, if you have a dependent going with independent right here, it takes a comma. Look at this. They can build their lives together. Independent. If we took off the so that, this is independent. But we can't take off so that right off the bat because then you have issues with independence and commas. So it creates something else if we just take it out. But if you just have, they can build their lives together, period, it is an independent. But if you have so that they can build their lives together, that is a dependent clause. After the family luncheon, my nephew married the love of his life. Did we need a comma in that?
No.
Why? Why is there not a comma in this one?
Because the preposition isn't.
Exactly, Paul. I mean, Daniel. Exactly, Daniel. After the family luncheon. Look, this is a prepositional phrase. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have a prepositional phrase, remember, if there's 4 or less words, then you don't use a comma. 1, 2, 3, 4. This right here is a prepositional phrase, so we're not using a comma. You don't have a subject and verb in here. My nephew married. Look, subject and verb. This is your main clause. But look, after the family ate lunch, why are we putting a comma here? This is a subordinating conjunction. After the family ate lunch, you have a subject and a verb. Subject and a verb. So this right here is a dependent clause with a subordinate word, with a subordinating conjunction. Then you need the comma for that reason. My nephew married the love of his life. Now this one, after the family ate lunch, this becomes a dependent clause. See, right here is dependent. The family ate lunch. Without the after, it's independent. See how this stands alone, all by itself. The family ate lunch, all by itself. Can you see how that is all by itself? Subject, verb. It does not need a subordinating word. Once you put the subordinating word, it has now become dependent. Right here, this needs to have the independent clause to make sense. It has to live, your dependent has to live with the independent. Your dependent clause has to live with your independent clause, just like your children have to live with the parents, the independent person. They have to live with that. When do we have the comma? After the entire clause. After the family ate lunch, comma. After the entire clause, you comma it off. You don't just comma it after your subject and your verb, because this is your direct object. You finish your entire clause before you put the comma in there. Because I have seen so many kids just want to put the comma like after the verb. All right, so we're going to go over some words here. We have amatoll. Listen to this. Am-a-tall. Shield. Control. See what happens here? This says O and this says con. Carpool. Super cool. Patrol. This turns to schwa. This right here says O. It's long. This is the accented syllable. Sheal, heel, barbel, towel. So this is the accent. This is a vowel L that turns to schwa. Pickle. Now, right here, you guys, this isn't the same kind of pickle. There's two different kinds of pickle.
Like you're in a pickle.
Yeah, there could be a consonant LE or an EL. A vowel, then an L. So this word is steal, right here. E, medal. See how they have, this is himmel. Comical. Comic is your base word. Here's your suffix added on. Vowels will not always turn to schwa. So you just need to be careful on how you're saying your words, because your vowels are not always switching to schwa. See, look, you would think it maybe should be right here, but this is a prefix right here. Amatol, patrol. It's not always, it's just because this is a closed O is not going to turn to schwa. Just because this right here is a closed A, it's not always going to turn to schwa. Comical, this, look, calm. This didn't turn to schwa. So be careful. Vowels will not always turn to schwa. Be careful on how you're reading. All right, that's it for this lesson. I really hope that you understand and study your independent clauses, your dependent clauses, and understand how to use your subordinating conjunctions. And we will see you in the next lesson. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.